Hey guys, tonight we slip into the thick air of East Africa, nearly 1 million years ago, where the grasslands stretch out like a golden sea and the trees rise in scattered groves that offer both shelter and threat. You're here in the Rift Valley, a place where the earth itself seems restless, cracked by volcanoes and shifting fault lines. The sun is a brutal overseer, baking the dust until it clings to your throat, while vultures trace slow spirals above the horizon, waiting for something, maybe you, to falter. You crouch beside a small group of hunters, their stone tools crude yet purposeful, flakes sharp enough to slice hide. The smell of smoke from a smouldering branch mixes with the iron tang of fresh kill nearby. This is not a tourist safari, and you probably won't survive this. But let's be honest, nobody really does out here, not without a tribe, a good spear and maybe some luck against lions the size of your nightmares. Before we dive headlong into the shadows of forgotten human lineages, tap that subscribe button so you don't miss these late-night journeys. And since this story is about the Shadow Children, traces of forgotten human species, drop your current location and local time in the comments. It'll be fun to see where in the world our strange, ancient family is being remembered. For now, lean back, breathe easy, and let's follow those faint footprints into deep time. The past is waiting, and so is sleep. You stand in the Rift Valley, and the first thing you realize is that the world is not made for a single kind of human. Around 1 million years ago, Africa is buzzing with variety. Homo erectus, tall and long-limbed, striding confidently with tools in hand. Homo heidelbergensis, stockier, maybe more communal in their hunts. And even more archaic, ancestors whose bones are little more than hints in the soil. Evolution isn't a straight line. It's a messy family tree where branches split, twist, and sometimes wither. You imagine each one as a cousin at a crowded reunion. And you, the modern sapiens, haven't even shown up yet. Imagine Homo erectus, the wanderer, the first true global traveler. Around 1.8 million years ago, they pack up from Africa and spread into Asia, reaching places like Georgia, China, and Indonesia. They're not booking tickets, they're following herds, sniffing water, and chasing horizons. Erectus leaves behind sturdy hand axes, symmetrical in a way that feels almost artistic, as if someone stopped mid-hunt to admire their craft. You hold one in your mind. It fits neatly in the palm, flaked edges gleaming like the world's earliest multi-tool. They are not almost human, they are human, just not your flavor of it. But erectus is only part of the chorus. Back in Africa, others are tinkering with fire, experimenting with hearths that glow in caves. Picture the first moment someone leaned too close and singed their eyebrows. Yes, even in prehistory, people probably laughed at each other's misfortunes. Fire isn't just warmth, it's social glue, predator control, and maybe even the first stage light for stories told in flickering orange. You realize that when multiple species share overlapping ranges, firelight could reveal unexpected neighbors, faces not like your own, and neighbors they had. A jawbone in Ethiopia, a skull in Zambia, stone flakes in Morocco, all are evidence of diversity so rich it makes the idea of a lone human lineage seem absurd. In fact, by 1 million years ago, the planet is crowded, at least half a dozen humankinds coexisting, some competing, others mingling. You wouldn't call it a peaceful United Nations of prehistory, but it's more like a constant shuffle of borders, each group leaving genetic graffiti on the canvas of time. The trouble is, fossils are stingy. They don't hand you a full biography, only scraps. A molar here, a femur there, sometimes a child's finger bone as fragile as chalk. Yet from those fragments, you reconstruct entire worlds. That molar might tell you they chewed tougher plants. That femur might suggest long migrations. That finger bone, well, we'll get to that finger bone because it's going to shake the story later. For now, Know this: every fragment says you are not alone. The Rift Valley continues to unspool before you. Herds of antelope thunder through the grasses, giant crocodiles lurk in muddy rivers, and humans, plural, not singular, navigate this danger zone. They cluster in groups, protect each other, maybe even share tactics. One group learns to nap stone just so, while another perfects traps for small game. Cultures sprout like regional accents, carried by brains that weigh only a little less than yours, but spark with their own ingenuity. By now, you might be thinking, wait, were these other humans really people? Yes, they walked upright, cradled infants, mourned their dead, and worried about tomorrow's food. If you bumped into one in the twilight, you'd recognize the tilt of the head, the squint of eyes, the purposeful stride. They might not ace your math exam, but they would have out-hunted you before lunch. Humanity in all its flavors was already a kaleidoscope. The phrase shadow children makes sense here. These forgotten relatives move at the edges of your awareness, hard to pin down, elusive in the record, yet undeniably present. They are the ghosts whose blood still flows in your veins, if only in fragments. You close your eyes and almost hear them breathing beside you, the crunch of their feet on dry soil, the low hum of voices that don't survive in writing but echo in your genetic memory. Of course, not every encounter was friendly. Resources were scarce, and predators plentiful. Picture two groups meeting at a watering hole, one taller with broader shoulders, the other smaller but sharper with tools. Eyes lock, knuckles tighten, and the air grows heavy with possibility. Do they share? Do they fight? Do they watch each other suspiciously across the reeds, waiting for nightfall to tip the balance? A modern you might call it diplomacy, but back then it was survival calculus. Yet, survival wasn't always teeth and claws. There's mounting evidence that some groups interbred, trading not only goods but genes. When you think about it, that's one way to handle diversity. You literally make family out of strangers, and while the fossil record is silent, DNA is chatty. It tells you that your ancestors weren't purists. They mingled, they mixed, they made sure that traces of those encounters survived even when whole species vanished. It's humbling, isn't it? You walk this earth thinking sapiens are the pinnacle, but the truth is you're a mosaic. Your immune system, your metabolism, maybe even your tolerance for cold nights in a drafty apartment. Some of that is thanks to cousins whose names you'll never know. You owe debts to shadows, and those debts keep you alive. That's not just history, it's biology with a poetic twist. The introduction to these forgotten lineages is like opening a door into a crowded house party you didn't realize you were invited to. Inside are Neanderthals brooding in the corner, Denisovans humming with altitude energy, Floresiensis hobbits dancing near the fire, and erectus holding court with their impressive toolkit. You, sapiens, arrive late, awkwardly clutching your drink, trying to figure out who's who, and before you can say hello, half the guests are already on their way out, fading into extinction. As you stand here in the Rift Valley, surrounded by these overlapping presences, the story feels both intimate and overwhelming. You're not just an observer, you're a descendant, carrying echoes of this crowded past in your very cells. The shadows are not strangers, they are family you've forgotten. Siblings whose names slipped from memory, but whose legacy you wear in your bones. The stage is set, the cast is assembled, and the curtain is only beginning to rise on the mystery of humanity's true diversity. You follow the trail of Homo erectus, the great wanderer of the human family. If section 1 was about realizing you're not alone in the Rift Valley, then here you pack your imaginary travel bag and walk with the first species that dared to push beyond the boundaries of Africa. Around 1.8 million years ago, they stepped out of their homeland and into the vast unknown. No passport control, no budget airlines, no complaints about legroom, just bare feet on soil that stretched from savannas to snow-dusted mountains. They didn't do this once or twice, but over and over, in waves that carried them across continents. And with every step they left behind clues for you to piece together: stone hand axes buried in ancient riverbeds, skulls with heavy brows in caves, and scattered bones that whisper, "We were here long before you." The fossils tell you that Homo erectus had bodies built for walking, long legs, narrow hips, and a ribcage shaped to keep breathing steady over marathon distances. You'd never beat them in a sprint against a lion, but in a long chase they'd wear the beast down. Imagine that endurance hunt. The animal sprints, the hunters follow, the animal stops. Panting, the hunters jog on. Relentless, the animal sprints again, but each burst costs it more than it costs the hunters. Hours later, when the sun is high and merciless, the animal collapses in sheer exhaustion. Dinner is served, courtesy of evolution's best stamina. You, with your gym membership and air-conditioned treadmill, would probably quit 10 minutes in. They, with nothing but persistence, thrive. Their tools are equally impressive. You hold a hand axe in your mind, almond-shaped, chipped carefully from a core stone, its edges sharp enough to skin an antelope or chop branches for fire. This wasn't random flaking, it was intention. Symmetry mattered. Some researchers suggest that erectus appreciated balance, perhaps even aesthetics. Imagine a hunter turning a finished hand axe over in the sunlight, proud of the gleam along the edge. It wasn't art on a cave wall, but it was art in the palm. And thousands of these tools litter archaeological sites across Africa, Asia, and Europe, like breadcrumbs marking their journey. One famous site, Denisovans in Georgia, holds the earliest fossils of erectus outside Africa. Picture it, 1.8 million years ago, a small group crossing into the Caucasus, adjusting to colder air and unfamiliar landscapes. The remains found there include old individuals with missing teeth, which means others must have chewed food of them or helped them survive. Compassion wasn't invented last week. It's been a survival strategy since deep time. Imagine sitting with that toothless elder, mashing roots so they could eat, and in return receiving stories or guidance. Even in the harshest conditions, humanity was already practicing care. From Georgia, erectus reached further east, their footprint stretching into China. At Zhoukoudian, near modern Beijing, caves yielded dozens of fossils once called Peking Man. They lived there roughly 700,000 years ago, and during frigid winters, the caves bore evidence of fire, though archaeologists still argue whether the flames were controlled or accidental. Either way, imagine the glow of embers in a dark chamber, the smoke curling up through stone cracks, the warmth drawing a group close. You'd hear the crackle of burning wood and see shadows dancing on the walls. That glow wasn't just heat, it was safety, light against predators, and maybe the first cinema for storytelling faces. Indonesia reveals an even stranger chapter. On the island of Java, erectus fossils stretch across hundreds of thousands of years. They survived there until as recently as 100,000 years ago, shockingly close to the arrival of modern humans. Think about it. While your kind was sketching mammoths on cave walls in Europe, another human species still roamed far-off islands. It's like realizing your long-lost cousins were alive just as your direct ancestors were painting history. The overlap is uncanny, the timeline messy. If you thought human history was neat and linear, well, Java laughs in your face. But life for erectus wasn't just long walks and stone tools. They adapted to varied environments: grasslands, forests, river valleys, volcanic ridges. Their diet was equally flexible: scavenged meat, roasted tubers, nuts cracked open with rocks, maybe even shellfish pried from coasts. Flexibility was their superpower, unlike specialized species that vanish when ecosystems shift. Erectus bent with the wind. It's no wonder they survived nearly 2 million years. far longer than Sapiens has been around so far. If longevity were the measure of greatness, they'd wear the crown. You're still a rookie by comparison. And let's not forget their brains. At roughly 900 cubic centimeters, they were bigger than earlier hominins, but smaller than yours. Yet size isn't everything. Those brains coordinated hunts, tool-making, and migration strategies. They solved problems: how to cross rivers, how to store food, how to endure climates that would chill your modern bones. You might joke about them not inventing Netflix, but they didn't need it. The real drama was survival, and they nailed it. Archaeologists sometimes argue whether erectus had language. No fossilized voice boxes survive, but you can imagine signals, grunts or gestures, maybe a call to signal prey, or hand signs to warn of predators. Even without Shakespearean flair, communication happened. Otherwise, coordinated hunts and long migrations would have been impossible. Perhaps they laughed 2 short bursts at a clumsy fall, or gentle chuckles around firelight. Humor, after all, is a glue as strong as any spear. If you follow their trail further east, the story stretches into mysteries. Some tools in Southeast Asia look unlike the hand axes of Africa, suggesting local innovation. Were these different cultural traditions, like regional cuisines, or signs of entirely separate groups? Archaeology doesn't give you a neat answer. It leaves you with open questions, the kind that keep scientists up at night, and maybe that's the point. Erectus wasn't a monolith, but a patchwork of cultures shaped by environment and need. The endurance of erectus is staggering. Think about it. 2 million years is 20 times longer than modern humans have existed. They weathered ice ages, volcanic winters, shifting landscapes, and predators without supermarkets, antibiotics, or smartphones. They must have been remarkably adaptable, building a survival playbook so effective that pieces of it are still visible in your habits today. Every time you gather with friends around a fire pit or walk a long distance without tiring, you echo them. You're a remix of old songs, still humming their chorus. But here's the twist. While erectus spread far and wide, they weren't the only humans around. Their migrations overlapped with other emerging species, creating a world where multiple humankinds coexisted. That means some valleys saw meetings, some friendly, some tense. Did they glance at each other across streams, curious or cautious? Did they swap tools, mates, or techniques? Or did they fight, one group's survival written in another's extinction? The fossil record hints, but never answers fully. You're left imagining those tense standoffs in a world where stranger might mean cousin. Erectus also leaves you with haunting silences. In some places, tools remain, but bones do not, as if the people vanished overnight. In others, bones lie jumbled, perhaps by predators or floods. Each site is a puzzle missing half its pieces. You stare at those gaps and realize how fragile memory is. Entire civilizations can be erased by time. What hope does a lone skull have? Yet somehow erectus refuses to be forgotten. Their story keeps resurfacing with every dig, every new analysis, every shard of stone pulled from the dirt, and then after so long they fade. By 100,000 years ago, erectus dwindles to their last refuges in Asia. The world is changing. New players like Neanderthals and Denisovans dominate. While modern humans stir in Africa, climate shifts strain resources, and the adaptable wanderers find themselves outmaneuvered. The line that once stretched across continents finally breaks, leaving only echoes in the soil. No monuments, no songs, no written words, just bones heavy with time, hand axes sharp as ever, and a trail that ends without ceremony. You stand at the edge of this story and feel both awe and melancholy. Awe at their resilience, their sheer tenacity, melancholy at their disappearance, the quiet exit of a species that gave the world endurance, tools, and perhaps the first sparks of culture. In their story, you glimpse not a primitive other, but a reflection of yourself, restless, resourceful, and destined to roam. The shadow children are already whispering through their footsteps, and Homo erectus leads the way into a human world far messier and richer than you were ever taught. You've already walked with Homo erectus across Africa, Asia, and into the far edges of the world, but their story is just one strand in the larger web of human diversity. Now you find yourself on the islands of Southeast Asia, where the landscape is lush, humid, and buzzing with strange life. This is the stage where some of the most puzzling and enchanting members of our extended family appear. Indonesia, the Philippines, and China reveal fossils that don't fit neatly into the erectus story or the later tale of Neanderthals and sapiens. They stand in between, odd puzzle pieces that force you to rethink what it means to be human. Here you'll meet the so-called hobbits, small-bodied humans whose existence sounds like a myth, yet is carved in stone, as well as other mysterious Asian finds that complicate your family tree like the awkward cousins nobody told you about until now. Let's start with Flores, a rugged volcanic island in Indonesia. It's a place ringed by steep cliffs, tangled in rainforest, and crawling with creatures you wouldn't expect. Giant storks taller than you, Komodo dragons with jaws full of bacteria, and dwarf elephants, small enough to look like pets from a distance. Into this setting enters Homo floresiensis, discovered in 2003 in Langbor Cave. The first skeleton, nicknamed the Hobbit, was barely over 3 feet tall. At first, scientists thought it must be a modern human with a disease like microcephaly, but the evidence stacked up. The bones were ancient, the proportions strange, the skull small but shaped with a unique identity. What emerged was the picture of a species unlike any other, tiny but tough, island-adapted humans who had carved out a living in a dangerous paradise. Imagine standing in that cave 60,000 years ago. The smell of damp limestone fills your nose, and faint firelight flickers on the walls. Small figures shuffle around you, their stone tools clinking as they prepare a meal of roasted tubers and perhaps the meat of those unlucky dwarf elephants. They laugh in high voices, chatter in ways you can't decipher, and glance at you with sharp eyes under heavy brows. You feel giant in their presence, like a clumsy outsider, yet despite their size, they radiate capability. In fact, you suspect if you had to race them up a cliff or forage in dense jungle, they'd leave you gasping in their wake. Their tools resemble the older Keolian and flake traditions, but shrunk down, adapted to their smaller hands. Blades chipped from volcanic rock, scrapers for hides, and points for spears that could pierce small game. Evidence suggests they hunted cooperatively, maybe even bringing down prey much larger than themselves. You picture a group of 3-foot-tall hunters facing a dwarf elephant, their voices raised, spears flashing in the firelight, determination outweighing their stature. It's almost comical, until you remember they survived on this island for tens of thousands of years. That's no joke. How did they get there? That's the million-dollar question. Flores has never been connected to mainland Asia, not even in the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age. To reach it, you needed boats or at least rafts strong enough to cross treacherous waters. Picture a group of small-bodied humans clinging to bamboo rafts, paddling across currents where sharks circle below. It almost sounds impossible. Yet here they are, fossils staring you in the face. Whether they were deliberate voyagers or accidental castaways swept by storms, their arrival changed the island's history forever. And in their DNA, or rather the lack of it in your own, they remain an enigma. No living humans carry obvious hobbit genes. They are a branch cut clean, leaving behind only bones and whispers. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Asia, another set of mysteries emerges. In central China, sites like Dali and Jinyushan yield skulls that don't fit neatly into the erectus to sapiens pipeline. They're broader faced, with large brains approaching modern sizes, yet archaic features cling to their jaws and brows. Some researchers call them archaic Homo sapiens, others think they might represent Denisovans, or perhaps a separate lineage altogether. You stare at their reconstructed faces and feel that uncanny recognition, human, but not quite. Like meeting a distant cousin who looks familiar until you notice the odd tilt of the eyes or the thickness of the skull. Then there's Luzon in the Philippines. In 2019, scientists revealed Homo luzonensis, another island species. Their fossils, teeth, hand bones and foot bones show a bizarre combination of traits. Curved toe bones, like climbers, small size like the hobbits, yet distinct in enough ways to warrant a separate name. The site at Colau Cave puts them around 67,000 years ago, living on yet another island never connected to the mainland. Again, the question arises, how did they arrive? The seas are barriers, yet these shadow children seem determined to defy them. Imagine the Philippines of that time, thick forests alive with monitor lizards, fruit bats and hidden rivers. A group of small humans moves quietly through the undergrowth, their toes gripping branches as easily as soil. They gather fruits, dig roots, and use simple stone tools to butcher animals. You watch them climb with agility that makes you jealous, leaping from ledges you'd hesitate to approach. Their world is green, humid, and alive with risk, yet they thrive, carving out existence in spaces modern humans would later colonize only with effort and seafaring technology. The presence of these island humans complicates the idea that erectus was the only wanderer. Were floresiensis and luzonensis descendants of erectus populations that shrank and adapted over generations? Or did they represent earlier, unknown dispersals out of Africa, carrying traits lost elsewhere? Archaeology doesn't settle the debate. It leaves the puzzle unsolved, daring you to imagine possibilities. What's certain is that Asia was not empty. It was crowded with human diversity, much of which remains in the shadows. One haunting thought: what if some of these island dwellers survived until very recently? Local legends in Flores speak of the Ebugogo, small hairy people who lived in caves and stole food until driven off by villagers just a few centuries ago. Skeptics dismiss it as folklore, yet when the bones of Floresiensis surfaced, the stories gained new weight. Could memory of real encounters echo in myth? You picture a 16th century farmer glancing nervously at the tree line, muttering about the Ebugogo stealing bananas. Science and folklore overlap, and suddenly the shadow children feel less like prehistory and more like neighbors who vanished only yesterday. In this landscape of enigmas, one thing becomes clear. Evolution was not a straight path toward you. It was an explosion of experiments, a scatter of bodies and minds adapted to niches you can hardly imagine. On islands, smallness became survival. In caves, broad skulls evolved. Across forests and rivers, strange hybrids appeared. Each adaptation was a solution to a world that constantly tested its inhabitants. Some survived longer than others, some faded without leaving descendants, but all remind you that the human story is not linear. It's braided, tangled, and rich with forgotten threads. What's humbling is that these discoveries are recent. 20 years ago, no one knew about the hobbits. 10 years ago, luzonensis wasn't even a word. Tomorrow, another cave might open to reveal yet another cousin. The ground still holds secrets, waiting for curious hands and patient brushes to uncover. Each fossil is a reminder that the world is bigger than your assumptions, that humanity has always been plural, never singular. And as you reflect, you realize how fragile the record is. Whole species, known from a handful of teeth and bones. You could walk over their graves and never notice. Rain erases, soil buries, time distorts. Yet somehow, enough remains to sketch silhouettes of lives once lived. They are faint, incomplete, but undeniable. The shadows stretch across Asia, filling forests and islands with small voices you'll never hear, laughter you'll never know, and ingenuity that deserved more than oblivion. The Asian enigmas remain enigmas. Were they your ancestors, your rivals, your forgotten siblings? The answer is yes, no, maybe, all of the above. What they teach you is that the family tree of humanity is more of a thicket, and you are only one of its twigs. The hobbits of Flores, the climbers of Luzon, the skulls of China, all stand as proof that humanity is not a single story, but a chorus of voices, many of which faded too soon. Their traces remain in caves, in bones, in whispered myths, and in the realization that shadows shaped you as much as the light. You leave the humid forests of Southeast Asia behind and step into the chill of southern Siberia, into the limestone chambers of Denisova Cave. It's around 208 when the modern story begins. Archaeologists uncover a tiny fragment of a finger bone, barely the size of a coin. To most eyes, it's insignificant, the kind of thing that might get misplaced on a lab shelf. But when scientists run genetic analysis, lightning strikes. The DNA doesn't match Homo sapiens, and it doesn't match Neanderthals either. It belongs to a completely unknown lineage, one that no one even suspected. Overnight, the Denisovans, named for the cave, step out of the shadows. They were real, they were different, and they had been hiding in plain sight all along. Imagine yourself in that cave 50,000 years ago. The air is damp, cold enough to sting your breath. Fires crackle faintly in the corners, smoke creeping upward. The walls are smeared with soot and ochre. You hear voices, a chorus of humans, but not like the ones you know. Their faces would be broad, jaws heavy, skin perhaps darker than Neanderthals, though no one knows for sure. They sit with tools of flint and bone, threading ornaments, preparing food, and you realize that this cave, so unassuming, held the DNA that would rewrite the human story. The Denisovan fossils are frustratingly rare. A finger bone, a few teeth, a jawbone found later in Tibet. That's it. Yet from these scraps, whole worlds are inferred. Their molars are enormous, far larger than yours, suggesting robust jaws for heavy chewing. Their genetic blueprint shows adaptations that echo in modern high-altitude populations, and their distribution? It must have been vast. DNA evidence hints that they ranged from Siberia to Southeast Asia, a people spanning thousands of miles, thriving in climates from frozen steppes to Himalayan peaks. What sets the Denisovans apart is their genetic legacy. When modern humans expanded out of Africa and into Asia, they met Denisovans and mingled. Today, people in Melanesia, Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA. Even Tibetans carry a Denisovan-derived gene that lets them breathe easily in thin mountain air. You panting on a Himalayan trek can thank a ghostly cousin for keeping you alive. It's as if the Denisovans left behind a survival toolkit embedded directly in your blood. Picture those encounters. A group of modern humans migrating through forests stumbles upon Denisovan hunters. Spears are raised, eyes narrow. Do they fight, negotiate, exchange mates and goods? The genome says the latter happened more often than you'd expect. Some encounters must have been violent, but others ended in children who carried the blend of both lineages. You can almost hear a Denisovan lullaby whispered over a newborn who carried two worlds in their veins. Their culture, too, leaves tantalizing hints. In Denisova Cave, archaeologists found jewelry, a green chlorite bracelet, polished and drilled with astonishing skill, dating back over 40,000 years. That's older than most cave art attributed to sapiens. Imagine the care, selecting the stone, drilling a tiny hole, smoothing it to a shine. This wasn't just survival, it was beauty, symbolism, meaning. The shadows you once thought boortish now gleam with creativity. They weren't beasts in skins, they were people with style. Still, Denisovans remain ghosts. Unlike Neanderthals who left behind many skeletons and caves full of tools, the Denisovans barely exist in the fossil record. Their true appearance is a mystery. Reconstructions rely on DNA predictions. Broad skulls, thick dental arches, stocky bodies like their Neanderthal cousins. You squint at these reconstructions and wonder if one walked past you in the street. Would you know? Or would you simply note the heavy brow, the powerful jaw and move on, never realizing you'd brushed against a different species of human? The Tibet jawbone, discovered in 2010 and identified years later, changes the picture even more. Found high on the Tibetan plateau, it shows that Denisovans lived at altitudes of 3,000 meters, where oxygen is thin and survival tough. They adapted in ways sapiens couldn't until much later. To live at such heights requires changes in hemoglobin production, heart rate, lung efficiency. Denisovans mastered it tens of thousands of years before you, passing those adaptations down through interbreeding. Your modern mountaineers borrow their breath. Their range must have been massive. Genetic traces show they mingled not just once, but multiple times with different populations. Some groups of modern humans picked up one set of Denisovan genes, others picked up different sets. That suggests Denisovans themselves were diverse, spread across Asia in distinct subgroups. They weren't a single shadow, but a network of shadows scattered across landscapes you've long since claimed as your own. And yet, like so many of their cousins, they vanish. Around 50,000 years ago, Denisovans retreat into extinction, leaving only scraps of DNA as their testimony. Why? Climate change? Competition with sapiens? Or simply absorption into larger populations? Until their distinctiveness dissolved, the record is silent. You picture the last Denisovan child looking out from a mountain ridge, breathing air thin as glass, unaware that their kind is dwindling forever. It's a quiet exit, the kind history rarely honors, but you remember them. Every breath at altitude, every flicker of ancient jewelry, every line of DNA that shields against disease is a whisper of their survival. They may have vanished physically, but they remain within you, as real as the beating of your heart. The shadows, once thought lost, never entirely disappeared. They live on, not in caves, but in bloodstreams and genes. The discovery of Denisovans proves a humbling truth. You don't know all your family. Even today, more bones may be lying in caves waiting to be found. Each new fossil could unveil yet another species, another branch of humanity hidden in the shadows. Denisovans remind you that history is bigger than textbooks, stranger than simple lineages, and closer to you than you realize. They were not myth. They were neighbors, lovers, innovators, and though they left few bones, they left a legacy as enduring as stone. So here you stand, in the cave where the shadows stir. The cold air brushes your cheek. The stone bracelet glitters faintly in your mind's eye. And somewhere deep in your chest, your heart beats with a rhythm shared by strangers long gone. Kin you never knew you had. That's the power of the Denisovan discovery. It makes you realize the shadows are not empty. They are full of voices still singing in your veins. You already know that Denisovans revealed themselves not through whole skeletons or neat rows of fossils, but through the code hidden inside a single finger bone. That DNA opened a door to something astonishing. Even though most of these shadow humans are long gone, their legacy continues to pulse in you and in millions of others alive today. The story isn't just that they existed, it's that they left pieces of themselves woven into modern bloodlines, leaving biological fingerprints scattered like ghostly graffiti on your cells. When you brush your teeth in the morning, when you climb a hill and find your lungs don't betray you, when you shake off a nasty flu, you may be thanking distant relatives you never even knew you had. Tonight you'll trace those invisible connections, following how Neanderthal and Denisovan genes still whisper inside modern bodies, quietly shaping who you are. Let's start with Neanderthals, since they are the better known of the two. They lived in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, overlapping with modern humans for at least 5,000 of those. When your ancestors spilled out of Africa around 60,000 years ago, they met Neanderthals face to face, and they didn't just glare across campfires, they mixed. Today, nearly everyone outside of Africa carries between 1% and 2% Neanderthal DNA. If you have pale skin, reddish hair, or a tendency toward freckles, there's a chance you're displaying Neanderthal inheritance. Even your sleep patterns, mood swings, and immune responses sometimes trace back to those interbreeding nights under Ice Age stars. Denisovans left their mark too, though in more concentrated pockets. Populations in Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and Aboriginal Australia carry the largest share, sometimes as much as 5%. That's a huge amount in evolutionary terms. Imagine your great-great-grandparent left you not just an heirloom ring, but half the furniture of their house. That's what Denisovans did. They left entire suites of useful genes that helped people thrive in challenging environments. One of the most famous is EPS1, the so-called super athlete gene in Tibetans. It allows their blood to carry oxygen efficiently at high altitudes, making life possible where oxygen levels are half what they are at sea level. Without it, people would gasp, faint, and struggle. With it, they herd yaks, plant barley, and raise children on the roof of the world. That's a Denisovan gift, written into the DNA of millions today. You pause and think about this. People long assumed that Neanderthals and Denisovans were dead ends, evolutionary losers who didn't make the cut, but the truth is they're still here, inside you. It's not extinction so much as absorption. Their genes blended into your lineage, becoming part of what it means to be sapiens. You might say you're a patchwork quilt, threads of Africa, threads of Europe, threads of Asia, stitched together by countless unions across millennia. The shadows aren't gone, they're stitched into your seams, and the genes don't just sit quietly, they do things. Neanderthal DNA contributes to your immune system, offering resistance to ancient viruses. Some pieces affect how your skin responds to sunlight, helping people adapt to northern latitudes, where winters are long and pale skin was an advantage for vitamin D production. Other fragments influence pain sensitivity, fat storage, even your risk for depression or nicotine addiction. So the next time you're grumpy on a cloudy day, blame your Neanderthal side. It might not fix your mood, but it gives you a historical excuse. But inheritance isn't always helpful. Some Neanderthal variants increase the risk of allergies, diabetes, or autoimmune diseases in modern humans. Think of it like a second-hand sweater, warm, yes, but with holes and itches you didn't expect. What kept Neanderthals alive in Ice Age Europe, like genes that ramped up inflammation to fight off infections, can cause overreactions in your cushy, modern life where you're more likely to face pollen than saber-tooths. Evolution isn't perfect, it's a trade-off, a gamble where yesterday's survival strategy might be today's health complaint. Denisovan DNA tells a similar tale of double-edged inheritance. That EPAS1 gene is miraculous at altitude, but it can increase risks of conditions like preeclampsia during pregnancy at lower altitudes. Genes that once helped resist tropical pathogens might also contribute to inflammatory responses that trouble modern immune systems. You see the pattern. The shadows gave you tools to survive, but every tool has a cost. Still, without those tools, your ancestors might never have survived the journeys into harsh new lands. This mingling raises an almost comedic image. Imagine a modern 21st century health clinic staffed with holograms of ancient cousins. A Denisovan nurse explains your breathing efficiency. A Neanderthal dietitian insists you eat more meat and fat to survive winters. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens, you complain about gluten sensitivity. The room goes quiet. Your cousins sigh. Evolution never promised comfort. It only promised survival. What's even wilder is that these shadow genes didn't just slip quietly into your blood. They sometimes spread rapidly. EPUS1, for instance, swept through Tibetan populations in record time by evolutionary standards because it was so beneficial. That's natural selection at warp speed. In other words, your ancestors borrowed from Denisovans and then said, "This gene slaps, let's keep it." You carry not just their presence, but their genius for survival. And it isn't only physical traits. Some brain-related genes, linked to synaptic function, mood regulation, and circadian rhythms show Neanderthal influence. Does this mean your creativity, your melancholy, your tendency to stay up scrolling at 3 a.m. could be echoes of shadow cousins? It's tempting to romanticize those scientists are cautious. Still, you can't help but imagine a Neanderthal teenager staring into the Ice Age night, restless, unable to sleep, pondering the meaning of the stars. In that moment, they're not so different from you. Of course, not everyone carries these shadows equally. Sub-Saharan African populations, whose ancestors never left the continent, or only did so later, have less Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. But recent research shows that even Africa wasn't untouched. Back migrations brought genes back in, sprinkling shadow fragments into African lineages too. No continent is entirely pure, no group untouched. Humanity has always been a story of mixing, meeting, and merging. Purity is a myth. Hybridity is the truth. Think of it this way. Every time you look in a mirror, you're seeing not just yourself, but a chorus of ancestors layered behind your reflection. Sapiens, yes, but also whispers of Neanderthal firelight, Denisovan mountain breath, maybe even fragments of other lineages now lost. You are not a single voice, you are a choir. Some notes are louder, others faint, but together they form the song of humanity. It's strange to realize how intimate these connections are. You carry the ghosts of unions long forgotten, written not in sagas or cave paintings, but in base pairs of DNA. Scientists can read them like archaeologists of flesh, unearthing stories of who loved whom, who traveled where, who adapted and who perished. You are living proof that extinction is never absolute when genes persist. In your veins flow the last embers of lineages whose bones lie silent. And here's the kicker. Your descendants, centuries from now, will carry traces of you in ways you can't imagine. Perhaps one day they'll be the ones looking back at us, marveling at the persistence of traits, the endurance of genes. You might vanish as an individual, but pieces of you, like the shadows before you, will ripple forward. Just as you are built on fragments of Denisovans and Neanderthals, so too will the future be built on fragments of you. That's the quiet continuity of life. Survival written in strands of code, immortal even when bodies fall. So as you lie back and breathe, feel the shadows inside you. They are not strangers. They are kin. They built your lungs, your immune defenses, your skin, your mood, your very resilience. They are the reason you can stand here now, pondering them. In every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of thought, you are more than sapiens. You are the sum of many, a walking archive of forgotten humans, and while they may no longer roam the steppes or mountains, they roam in you, still alive in the silence of your cells. By now you've seen how Denisovan and Neanderthal DNA lingers in you like ghostly fingerprints. But to understand just how closely intertwined these shadow lineages were with your own, you need to step into the murky realm of interbreeding and hybrids. This is not the romanticized Romeo and Juliet version of prehistory. It's messier, stranger, and far more consequential. The truth is that your family tree looks less like a tidy oak with neat branches and more like a tangled thicket, where roots twist, branches graft, and vines loop back on themselves. Encounters between species weren't rare exceptions, they were the rule, and those encounters left real, flesh and blood children whose remains sometimes still speak from the soil. Tonight you follow the trail of those hybrid lives where shadows and sapiens intertwined. That single hybrid wasn't alone. Genetic signatures in modern populations show repeated mingling events across time and geography. Some modern humans carry Neanderthal genes from one interbreeding, others from entirely separate encounters. Denisovan ancestry also comes in multiple waves, hinting at different subgroups mingling with sapiens at different times. Think of it as a centuries-long party where the guest list kept changing, and the results were never simple. The past wasn't one moment of contact, it was a pattern of entanglement. You might be tempted to ask, how did these encounters actually happen? Picture an Ice Age valley where two bands meet at the edge of a river. They eye each other warily. The Neanderthals are shorter, stockier, with heavy brows. The sapiens are leaner, faces narrower, their tools a bit more refined. But curiosity wins. Maybe they trade flints, share meat, or simply stand close enough that suspicion melts into familiarity. One night a fire burns lower, the stars look the same to both groups, and a boundary vanishes. The next morning children are possible. That's not speculation, that's written in your DNA. But not all mingling was so gentle. Some encounters may have been forced, born out of violence or coercion. Prehistory doesn't sanitize itself for your comfort. Yet even in those darker possibilities, biology recorded the outcome: new individuals carrying mixed ancestry, new generations bridging gaps. Genes don't care about intentions, they only move forward if they can. And so, even under hardship, the threads of lineages wove tighter. What's remarkable is how these hybrids weren't evolutionary dead ends. Some animals produce sterile hybrids. Mules, for example, can't reproduce, but human lineages proved astonishingly compatible. Hybrids could grow, thrive, and have children of their own. That's why their genes persist today. Imagine the Denisova girl growing into adulthood, raising children whose very existence blurred the definition of species. She and countless others ensured that the walls between sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans were porous, not absolute. It challenges your definition of species. Textbooks once insisted sapiens and Neanderthals were separate species. Yet if they produced fertile children, were they really? Some scientists argue they were more like subspecies, regional varieties of one broad humankind. Others keep the distinction, pointing to differences in skull shape, body size, and evolutionary history. Either way, the categories blur. You realize the word species is less of a hard box and more of a suggestion, one that evolution gleefully ignores whenever it wants. Consider also the genetic flow from ghost populations. Studies of modern DNA reveal traces of interbreeding with lineages that haven't even been identified yet. You carry genes from hominins who left no fossils, whose faces you'll never reconstruct, whose names you can't even guess. They are the ultimate shadow children, known only because their DNA slipped into yours. It's as if the family photo album has missing pictures, yet their fingerprints still smudge the corners. Every time scientists run new sequencing, more of these unknown ghosts step out from the dark. The consequences of these hybrids were enormous. Interbreeding enriched sapiens with traits that made survival possible in new lands. Neanderthal immune genes helped combat pathogens in Europe. Denisovan altitude adaptations made Tibet habitable. Even genes linked to fat metabolism, skin pigmentation, and hair structure came from these unions. Without hybrids, sapiens might have been weaker, slower to spread, or even unable to colonize certain regions. You didn't just survive alongside shadows, you survived because of them. Imagine what life was like for a hybrid child, though. In a small band of sapiens, a child with heavier brow ridges might look different. Did they face stigma, or were differences embraced as signs of strength? In a Neanderthal group, a child with a more gracile frame might seem unusual, yet survival often depends on cooperation, and perhaps children of mixed heritage became bridges between groups, carrying stories and knowledge back and forth. You'll never know the exact dynamics, but you can guess that hybrids weren't just tolerated, they were vital. The Denisova girl wasn't alone. There are hints of Neanderthal sapiens hybrids, Denisovan sapiens hybrids, and even multiple layers of mixing over generations. Some modern genomes carry stacked ancestry, where one set of shadow genes overlays another like layers of sediment. The picture isn't neat, it's chaotic, full of crossings and recrossings. Your DNA is not a line, it's a braid thickened by countless interwoven strands. And remember, these interbreedings weren't just sapiens with others. Neanderthals and Denisovans mingled with each other too, producing hybrids independent of modern humans. That means shadow populations were already entangled before you even entered the scene. They didn't wait for you to complicate things, they complicated things on their own. Your arrival only added another knot to the weave. Sometimes you wonder what might have happened if these hybrids had flourished even more. Could there have been entire populations of mixed descendants, forming new lineages that endured? Perhaps some did, and their traces are still hidden, waiting to be uncovered in caves or in unexplored genomes. Science keeps surprising you with every new bone and every new sequence. Who knows how many more Denisova girls lie buried, their hybrid stories waiting to speak. For a moment, pause and reflect. You like to think of yourself as distinct, modern, sapiens with a neat identity. But the mirror you hold is full of shadows. Every blink of your eye, every beat of your heart, every gene in your cells is evidence of entanglement. You're not pure, you're never meant to be. You are hybrid, through and through. It's not a weakness, it's your greatest strength. So next time you picture your ancient ancestors, don't see isolated tribes on separate evolutionary tracks. See a world alive with crossings, caves where Neanderthals raised children with sapiens, mountains where Denisovans shared fires with strangers, valleys where unknown ghosts slipped into your bloodline. The hybrids weren't exceptions, they were the rule, and because of them, you are here. The Ice Age landscape stretches before you, vast plains of steppe, frozen rivers like glass ribbons across the earth, and winds so sharp they sting your face. If earlier sections showed you who mingled with whom, this one shows you what it meant to live in those brutal environments. For Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other shadow children, survival wasn't about philosophy or abstract thought. It was about staying alive when the nights dropped to lethal cold, when mammoths thundered past, when food could vanish for weeks. Tonight you walk into their world of harsh climates, where every fire was a victory, every shelter a lifeline, and every adaptation the difference between extinction and endurance. Picture a Neanderthal camp in Ice Age Europe. The ground is frozen solid, the grass brittle underfoot, and snow piles against the cliff face where they've built their shelter. Their bodies are compact and strong, built like human furnaces to conserve heat. Barrel chests expand with each breath, short limbs hug warmth close, and thick bones carry muscles forged for hunting in the cold. Around them, hides stretched across wooden frames block the wind, while hearth fires burn low, tended carefully. The smoke clings to the air, acrid but comforting, reminding you that life itself depends on this flame. Without fire, frostbite and hypothermia would claim them by dawn. They were masters of clothing, though not in the fashionable sense you might imagine. Animal hides wrapped tight, fur cloaks sewn with bone needles, sinew threads binding it all together. Archaeological finds reveal awls and perforated tools, evidence of leatherwork. Imagine the scene. One Neanderthal crouches, scraping fat from a reindeer hide. Another threads bone needles, sewing patches together. Children huddle close, wrapped in oversized furs, their noses pink against the cold. You can almost smell the tang of smoke and hide, a cocktail of survival perfume. Food, too, required ingenuity. Large game mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison provided meat, fat and bone, but hunts were dangerous. Imagine a group stalking a mammoth across the frozen steppe. Spears are hefted, strategy whispered. One hunter waves to distract, another circles. They strike, risking trampling or goring. The mammoth roars, blood steams against the icy air, and in that clash of flesh and stone lies the possibility of both feast and death. When successful, the carcass feeds the entire group for weeks. Hides become shelter, bones become tools, nothing is wasted. But not every day was a mammoth day. Sometimes diets shifted to smaller prey, hares, birds, even fish caught under ice. Archaeologists uncover bonefish hooks, nets and traces of shellfish gathering along coasts. Neanderthals and their cousins weren't just brutes chasing mammoths. They were opportunists, able to exploit every niche. In caves near Gibraltar, shells show signs of harvesting, proof that they combed shorelines for food. Picture them cracking mussels on stones, slurping the salty flesh, laughing at each other's grimaces. Even in the Ice Age, humour had its place. And then there were plants. Charred remains of roots and seeds show that Neanderthals cooked vegetables, supplementing meat-heavy diets. They may have even used medicinal plants. Traces of yarrow and chamomile in dental tartar suggest knowledge of herbal remedies. Imagine one elder handing a bundle of bitter herbs to a younger hunter with a toothache. It's the prehistoric version of a pharmacy minus the long lines and insurance paperwork. Their survival wasn't brute force alone. It was knowledge passed through generations. Denisovans, too, adapted to extremes, but their theatre was often high mountains and frigid plateaus. To breathe at 3,000 meters without technology is almost miraculous. Their bodies carried genetic tricks, alterations in hemoglobin regulation that made thin air livable. Picture them moving easily across slopes where modern moderns gasp, carrying loads of firewood, hunting wild yak, weaving shelters in caves perched above cloud lines. Their lungs expand, hearts steady, while you, the unadapted visitor, would crumple in dizziness within hours. Shelter mattered as much as food. Caves served as natural strongholds, their mouths shielded with hides to keep in heat. Inside, multiple hearths glowed. Archaeologists at sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq and Denisova Cave in Siberia found layers of ash, proof of repeated use. You can imagine the cycles: fire lit, fire dies, ashes swept, new logs placed. The rhythm of warmth was as constant as heartbeat. In some places, evidence suggests structures built of stone circles or wooden posts, prehistoric architecture against the elements. Of course, predators shared the same world. Lions, hyenas, bears, all larger than their modern descendants, prowled the night. To survive, humans had to outthink them. Fires deterred some but not all. Picture a night when growls echo at the cave mouth, shadows flicker against firelight, and hunters grip spears tight. One charge, one strike, and the balance could tip. Every night was a gamble, a fragile treaty between humans and the wilderness. It makes your locked front door and central heating feel laughably luxurious. Humor again crept into even these hard lives. Imagine slipping on ice while dragging a carcass. the group bursting into laughter before rushing to help, or a child poking at embers until sparks fly, only to be scolded by an elder waving a half-burnt stick. Hardship breeds resilience, but resilience breeds light-heartedness. Without laughter, the cold would press too heavy. In that sense, Neanderthals weren't so different from you, finding joy even in frostbitten mornings. Seasons dictated everything. Winters were brutal, but summers brought grasslands, thick with grazing herds. Migration followed prey, forcing groups to move often. Campsites were temporary, belongings portable. Spears, scrapers, hides, all could be packed and carried. You picture them trudging across snow, children slung in fur cradles, hunters scanning for signs of game. The horizon was endless, but every step carried hope of food, shelter, and survival. Their tools show remarkable adaptation. Stone points carefully flaked, hafted onto wooden shafts with resin and sinew. Bone awls, needles, scrapers for hides. Each tool was a small miracle, the product of knowledge, patience, and countless failures. Imagine the frustration of a flint core breaking wrong, sparks wasted, then the satisfaction when a perfect blade gleams in firelight. These weren't mindless brutes. They were engineers of survival, solving problems with creativity you'd recognize in any workshop today. Archaeologists sometimes find traces of pigment, ochre, suggesting body decoration or symbolic use. Imagine painting your skin red before a hunt, not just for ritual but for morale. In that cold, identity mattered. Who you were, who you belonged to, how you faced the elements. Even the smallest gestures, bracelets, beads, painted hides, spoke of a desire to be more than mere survival machines. They wanted meaning, just like you. It's easy to romanticize, but never forget the harshness. Infant mortality was high, injuries often fatal, winters merciless. One broken leg could spell doom. Fossil evidence of healed fractures, though, shows care injured individuals nursed back to health. That's community in action, survival through cooperation. Imagine carrying an injured hunter on a stretcher of hides, sharing food until they healed. In those acts of kindness, humanity shines through frost and shadow. So you sit now by their fire, wrapped in imagined hides, watching sparks drift upward. You realize that survival wasn't only about fire, food, or shelter. It was about resilience, creativity, and the strength of groups bound together. In the harshest climates, the shadow children endured not because they were different from you, but because they were so very much the same. And as the wind howls outside their cave, you understand that every breath you take today is built on their stubborn will to live. The winds of the Tibetan plateau whip across your face, thin and sharp, carrying less oxygen than your lungs would like. You're standing at nearly 3,500 meters above sea level, where even modern climbers train months in advance and still wheeze with every step. Yet here, tens of thousands of years ago, Denisovans moved with ease, climbing ridges, hunting game, and building lives where most humans would collapse. This is their unique stage, masters of the mountains, the ones who cracked a genetic code that let them thrive where the air is half as thick as at sea level. If Section 7 was about general strategies for cold survival, Section 8 is about something even more miraculous. How one forgotten human lineage literally rewrote the rules of breathing. Start with the jawbone found in Baishia Karst Cave on the Tibetan Plateau. It's massive, thick-boned and dated to about 60,000 years ago. At first, it baffled researchers. It didn't look quite like a Neanderthal, and it wasn't sapiens. Only later, with protein analysis, did they realize it belonged to Denisovans. The discovery was shocking. Here was evidence that Denisovans weren't just Siberian cave dwellers. They had ventured high into the Himalayas, to altitudes most humans avoid even today. That jawbone wasn't just a fossil, it was proof of resilience, a snapshot of life lived where survival seems impossible. But the real marvel isn't the bone itself, it's what Denisovans passed down. In modern Tibetans, Sherpas and some other Himalayan populations, there exists a gene variant known as erectus. This little switch changes how hemoglobin works, preventing the blood from becoming too thick in low oxygen environments. Without it, your body overproduces red blood cells at high altitude, risking clots, strokes, and exhaustion. With it, your blood flows more easily, your heart beats steadier, you can haul loads up Everest while the rest of us gasp at base camp. Genetic analysis shows that erectus didn't come from Homo sapiens. It came from Denisovans. That means the very breath of modern Tibetans is a Denisovan inheritance. Imagine the scenes that gene represents. A band of Denisovans trekking across a plateau, their lungs steady, hearts unfazed, while sapiens newcomers trail behind, dizzy and nauseous. Fires blaze in mountain caves, the smell of roasted yak mingling with thin air. Children chase each other across rocky slopes without stumbling. Adults climb ridges with baskets of firewood, seemingly tireless. This wasn't just survival, it was mastery of an environment hostile to most other humans. When modern Tibetans climb with astonishing endurance, they echo the shadows who first called those heights home. The plateau wasn't empty. Herds of wild yak, blue sheep, and gazelle grazed sparse grasslands. Rivers cut through valleys, providing water and fish. But every resource was harder to reach, every task a test. Denisovans adapted by spreading their camp strategically, moving with the rhythm of seasons, and exploiting every niche. Archaeological traces, stone tools scattered near caves, tell of their persistence. Picture a small band huddled at Bershia Cave, snow drifting outside, fire flickering against limestone walls, tools stacked neatly along the floor. Their presence there is astonishing, a reminder that human potential is broader than you imagine. It wasn't just oxygen that made high-altitude life dangerous. Cold winds sliced through firs, food was scarce, and storms rolled down from peaks without warning. Yet Denisovans not only endured, they flourished long enough to pass on their adaptations through generations, and eventually into your kind. That means their population wasn't a tiny, gasping remnant. They must have been established, confident, deeply familiar with the plateau. When you walk through Tibet today and hear chants drifting from monasteries, remember that Denisovans once filled those valleys with their own voices. And it wasn't only Tibet. Genetic studies suggest Denisovan ancestry in populations of New Guinea, Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia as well. This means they were a diverse, wide-ranging people, not limited to cold steppes or mountain caves. They adapted to everything from tropical islands to Himalayan ridges. That breadth makes them remarkable. While Neanderthals dominated Europe, and sapiens eventually spread globally, Denisovans carved out a continental empire across Asia, flexible and versatile. You don't survive in both jungles and mountains, unless you're very, very good at being human. You might wonder what it felt like for sapiens when they first encountered these mountain masters. Picture a group of early sapiens trudging into the plateau around 40,000 years ago, coughing, slowing, struggling with altitude sickness. They stumble upon Denisovans, who stand tall and easy in the same thin air. For the sapiens, survival might have seemed impossible. For Denisovans, it was Tuesday. Did they laugh? Did they pity? Or did they see potential mates? Genetic evidence suggests the last option played out. Sapiens inherited those adaptations through interbreeding, blending survival strategies rather than dying out. Once again, the shadows didn't just coexist, they improved you. erectus isn't the only Denisovan gift. Other gene fragments influence how modern immune systems respond to diseases, how metabolism adapts to different diets, even how skin reacts to climate. But Ipus 1 is the crown jewel, a reminder that sometimes the most profound inheritance isn't a tool you hold in your hand, but the ability to breathe in places where no one else can. Every Tibetan prayer flag fluttering against icy skies is a silent salute to Denisovans, the true pioneers of altitude. And think about the ripple effects. Because of Denisovan genes, entire civilizations could eventually rise in the Himalayas. Monasteries, temples, trade routes like the Silk Road all depended on humans being able to live and thrive at high altitude. Without those ancient adaptations, Tibet as you know it might never have existed. History itself, religion, politics, culture, was shaped by the shadows breathing steadily on mountaintops long before. There's even something poetic in this. Denisovans are almost invisible in the fossil record, yet their legacy is strongest in the highest, most visible peaks on Earth. You may never see their faces clearly, but their presence towers above you in mountains that scrape the sky. Their bones are scarce, but their breath lingers in millions of chests. They are the ghosts of altitude, the unseen companions of climbers, monks and herders alike. It makes you wonder how many other invisible gifts lie hidden. What if other shadow genes enabled survival in deserts, or resistance to ancient plagues, or tolerance to strange foods? Maybe Denisovans carried secrets you haven't uncovered yet, waiting in unsequenced genomes. Each discovery is a reminder that humanity is not yours alone. It's a collective inheritance, shared across lineages that vanished in body but not in spirit. For a moment, close your eyes and picture it. You're standing at Everest Base Camp, lungs straining, heart racing. Next to you, a Sherpa guide moves lightly, calm as if walking a village road. In that contrast is the story of Denisovans. You gasp, because your body wasn't built for this. They thrive because theirs was. And in their generosity, or perhaps just in their unions, you borrowed their strength. You are breathing borrowed air, a legacy carved in mountains and blood. So when the night grows cold and the wind sings across Tibetan ridges, remember the shadow masters of altitude. Their fires burned where yours would flicker out. Their lungs steadied where yours would falter. Their genes carried forward so you could one day tell their story. They are gone but not lost. Every prayer whispered to the mountains carries their echo. Every step a Tibetan child takes in the thin air is another proof that Denisovans still live, in breath, in blood, and in the silence between heartbeats at the roof of the world. The air grows heavier and warmer as you leave the Tibetan plateau behind and step into the humid forests and volcanic ridges of Southeast Asia. Here, far from mammoth steppes and glacial valleys, another kind of shadow human carved out its place. The island dwellers. These were the smallest of the human cousins, Homo floresiensis in Indonesia and Homo luzonensis in the Philippines. Creatures so strange that when their bones were first unearthed, scientists thought they must be diseased modern humans, but no, they were their own thing, tiny yet fierce, shaped by the quirks of island life. If Neanderthals embodied brute Ice Age resilience and Denisovans conquered mountains, these islanders mastered survival in miniature, turning isolation into innovation. Flores, the rugged Indonesian island, holds the most famous of these stories. In 2003, researchers excavating Leongbora Cave uncovered a nearly complete skeleton of a woman only about 3 feet 6 inches tall. Her skull was the size of a grapefruit, her brain no larger than a chimpanzee's, and yet scattered around her were stone tools, blades, scrapers, points crafted with skill and intent. This was no child, no deformed sapiens. This was Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit. At first, skeptics scoffed. Surely this was just a pathological case, but then more bones surfaced, all similarly small, confirming a population of tiny humans who thrived here tens of thousands of years ago. Island life explains much of their size. Biologists call it island dwarfism. Big animals shrink, small animals sometimes grow, all due to limited resources and ecological niches. On Flores, giant storks towered, Komodo dragons lumbered, and pygmy elephants no bigger than a pony roamed the jungles. In such a world, a smaller human body was more efficient, needing less food, moving more easily through dense undergrowth, scaling ridges without wasting energy. Over thousands of years, Floresiensis became perfectly adapted islanders. Picture their daily lives. The rainforest canopy hums with cicadas, the ground damp with rain. A group of hobbits crouches near a fire at the cave mouth, roasting tubers dug from volcanic soil. One sharpens a stone flake against a larger rock, sparks flying. Another mends a spear shaft, bone all in hand. Children, small even by hobbit standards, scurry around with laughter that echoes off limestone walls. Outside, the heavy thud of a Komodo dragon's tail warns them to stay alert. Their world was dangerous, but they were clever, coordinated, and resourceful. The tools of Floresiensis show remarkable ability. Despite their small brains, they produce stone flakes with sharp edges, hunting prey and butchering carcasses. At Leangboa, archaeologists found evidence suggesting they hunted the pygmy elephants. Massive compared to them, yet still manageable with coordinated strategy. Imagine half-sized humans facing down an elephant the size of a cow. Spears jab, voices rise. The animal trumpets in panic before falling. For weeks its meat sustains the group. The hobbits weren't weaklings. They were predators, bold and daring in a world of giants. And how did they get there? Flores has always been separated from the Asian mainland by deep ocean trenches. Reaching it required crossing open water. This implies boats or rafts, whether deliberate or accidental. You can picture a group of early humans clinging to bamboo rafts, currents sweeping them toward the island, storms threatening to capsize them. Some may have drowned, but others made landfall, bringing fire and stone tools. Over generations, their descendants became the hobbits of Flores. If so, these were among the earliest mariners in human history, venturing onto seas long before modern ships. Now, shift north to the Philippines. In 2019, another revelation stunned the world. Homo luzonensis. At Callao Cave on the island of Luzon, researchers uncovered teeth and bones, tiny like Floresiensis, yet distinct in their own right. The curved finger and toe bones suggested climbing ability, as if these humans lived partly in the trees. Their teeth showed unusual shapes, unlike sapiens or Neanderthals. Once again, the story repeated. An island, a small human lineage, adapted to survive in isolation. Luzon, like Flores, was never connected to the mainland. To reach it, you had to cross open water. Once again, these shadow children show you that ancient humans were far better seafarers than you give them credit for. Picture Luzonensis in their rainforest home. Vines hang heavy, birds shriek overhead, and waterfalls crash down into hidden pools. Small humans move silently, gripping branches with curved toes, foraging fruit, setting traps for small animals. Their world is green, humid, and buzzing with life compared to the cold caves of Europe. This life seems almost idyllic, but don't be fooled. Predators prowled, food could run scarce, storms battered coasts. Survival here demanded agility, cunning, and adaptability. Luzonensis had all three. The tragedy is that neither Floresiensis nor Luzonensis survived beyond about 50,000 years ago, right around the time modern humans began spreading through the region. Whether competition, disease, or sheer bad luck drove them out, the timing suggests sapiens played a role. Imagine the moment, a band of modern humans, taller, more numerous, more technologically advanced, stumbling upon a community of hobbits. Did they see them as kin, rivals, curiosities? Did they fight, merge, or simply displace them over time. The archaeological record is silent, but the disappearance of these island dwellers coincides suspiciously with your arrival, and yet echoes remain. On Flores, local folklore tells of the Abu Gogo, small hairy people who lived in caves and stole food, said to have existed until just a few centuries ago. Villagers described them as mischievous, sometimes dangerous, but unmistakably human-like. When Floresiensis was discovered, these stories suddenly felt less like myth and more like cultural memory. Could humans on Flores have really coexisted with hobbits in recent history? Skeptics doubt it, but the possibility lingers, adding mystery to their already fantastical tale. Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis force you to rethink what counts as advance. For decades, scientists assumed small brains meant limited intelligence, but these islanders prove otherwise. They made tools, hunted prey, possibly controlled fire, maybe even crossed seas. Their brains were small, but brains aren't everything. Organization, cooperation, creativity, all existed in forms that defy your neat definitions of intelligence. If you measured them only by size, you'd miss the point. Survival was their proof of genius. It's tempting to think of them as evolutionary oddities, isolated side branches doomed to fade. But that misses their achievement. They thrived for tens of thousands of years in environments where even modern humans would struggle. They weren't failures, they were success stories cut short by circumstances. If sapiens hadn't arrived when they did, who knows? Maybe the hobbits would still be on Flores today, tending fires in caves, watching Komodo dragons stalk by. Perhaps you'd be telling stories not of their extinction, but of their resilience as neighbors in your shared world. There's also something haunting about their disappearance. Unlike Neanderthals or Denisovans, who live on in your DNA, Floriensis and Luzonensis left no genetic trace in modern humans, at least none identified yet. When they vanished, they truly vanished, leaving only bones and myths. They are the purest of shadows, glimpsed briefly, then gone. Their silence is louder because it lacks even the whisper of genetic inheritance. They remind you that extinction isn't always softened by absorption, sometimes it is final. And yet, even in silence, they speak. Their bones challenge you to see humanity as more than one face. Their tools prove ingenuity isn't measured by brain volume. Their legends remind you that memory can stretch further than you think. These island dwellers, though gone, expand your definition of human, forcing humility. You are not the pinnacle. You are one of many, lucky enough to survive. So tonight, as you imagine the warm air of Flores or the green jungles of Luzon, picture the small figures moving through them. A hobbit sharpening stone, a Luzonensis child swinging from a branch, a fire glowing in a cave. They are shadows, yes, but shadows with firelight in their eyes, who lived, laughed, and endured long before you. Their islands still hold their bones, their myths still carry their voices, and their stories a reminder that even the smallest humans left the largest questions in your history. The shadows you've met so far, Neanderthals with their strength, Denisovans with their mountain lungs, island dwellers, small but fierce, would seem incomplete without one more layer of humanity, their tools and the hints of symbolic behavior they left behind. It is easy to reduce them to brute survival, to imagine they spent their days only hunting, eating, and huddling against the cold. But scattered across caves, riverbeds, and plateaus, you find traces of thought that stretch beyond necessity. Carefully flaked tools, beads carved from bone, pigments smeared on stone, and even the first glimmers of art. These are not the signatures of animals, they are the sparks of minds not so different from your own. Tonight you lean in close, listening for those faint echoes of meaning as told through stone, bone, and color. Start with tools. The Acheulean hand axe, perfected by Homo erectus, was still in use among later lineages, sometimes for hundreds of thousands of years. These teardrop-shaped stones were not haphazard. They were symmetrical, deliberate, beautiful in their balance. When you hold one, even in imagination you feel design. That alone suggests a sense of aesthetics, or at least of pride in craftsmanship. For Neanderthals and Denisovans, the technology advanced further. They shaped Mousterian tools, flakes, scrapers, points and blades, all carefully struck from prepared cores. To produce them required not just skill, but planning, an ability to visualize the finished tool before striking. That's abstract thinking, a hallmark of complex minds. Imagine a Neanderthal napper seated near a fire. The cave is filled with smoke and laughter. He lifts a flint core, strikes with precision, flakes tumbling into his lap. He pauses, turns it in the firelight, then chips again, a rhythm as steady as drumming. His companions wait nearby, knowing this tool will soon skin a deer or scrape a hide. The child watches, mimicking the motion with smaller stones, learning the family trade. This is education, apprenticeship in the oldest classroom in the world. Now consider bone and antler tools. Neanderthals fashioned awls, needles, and spear tips. In southern France, archaeologists found lassoirs, bone smoothing tools used to work hides, still recognizable in their polish. To create such implements requires creativity. The leap from this bone is food to this bone can shape other materials. It's the same leap you make when you turn scrap wood into furniture. That moment of imagination bridges animal instinct and human culture. And then there are ornaments. In Denisova Cave, a bracelet made of green chlorite was uncovered, drilled with holes so fine they suggest incredible skill. One edge is polished smooth, as if worn on a wrist for years. This isn't about hunting or warmth. It's about beauty, identity, maybe even belonging. A bead of ostrich shell here, a tooth with a carved groove there. Each speaks of humans marking themselves, saying, I am part of this group. I wear this sign. Symbolism flickers alive in those tiny gestures. Even burials hint at symbolism. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Neanderthal skeletons were found with pollen grains around them, leading to speculation that flowers had been placed in graves. Some dispute remains. Maybe rodents dragged the pollen in, but the possibility lingers that Neanderthals mourned their dead with rituals. Picture them gathering around a body, placing wildflowers at its side, firelight flickering as voices murmur in grief. Even if the flowers were an accident, the careful positioning of bodies in graves shows intent. Death mattered, memory mattered. There is also music, or at least its possibility. In Slovenia, a fragment of a bare femur with holes drilled in it has been argued to be a Neanderthal flute. Debate rages. Is it really a flute or just a chewed bone? But imagine, just for a moment, the haunting sound of notes rising in a cave echoing against stone. Whether real or not, the idea alone tells you something. You want your shadows to sing because you feel in your bones they could. Fire use too reveals culture. Beyond warmth, fire was a gathering point. Hearths uncovered in caves show repeated use over centuries, circles of stones blackened with soot. Around them stories must have been told, gestures shared, laughter rising with sparks. Firelight is the first theatre, the first classroom, the first sacred space. Neanderthals, Denisovans, even hobbits, all gathered around flames not just to eat, but to be together. The symbolism of fire still lingers in your life. Candles at rituals, campfires with friends, the warm glow of hearths at home. You inherited not just the technology but the meaning, and don't overlook the delicacy of their work. In some Neanderthal sites, Eagle talons were found with cut marks, likely strung as necklaces. Think of the symbolic weight, wearing the claws of a predator around your neck. It's a statement, a badge of power, a link to the animal world. Jewelry isn't survival, it's identity, ritual, self-expression. The shadows were capable of all of it. When you line up these artifacts, tools, beads, pigments, burials, you see a pattern. The shadows were not mindless survivors. They were thinkers, feelers, makers of meaning. Each artifact is a whisper. We were more than beasts. We thought, we dreamed, we marked our place in the world. It's humbling to realize that these gestures predate sapiens' art. For years, you told yourself that only your kind painted caves or buried their dead with care, but Neanderthals beat you to it. Denisovans crafted jewelry before you carved ivory figurines. Even the hobbits, with their tiny brains, made tools that defy your assumptions. The shadows weren't waiting for you to teach them. They were already walking paths of meaning. Still, many mysteries remain. Did Neanderthals tell stories in spoken language? Did Denisovans have rituals you'll never uncover? Did hobbits sing by firelight, their voices high and strange in jungle caves? The evidence is too fragmentary to answer. You are left with tantalizing glimpses, enough to suggest possibility, but not enough to confirm. That's the curse and beauty of prehistory. Silence punctuated by whispers. For now, the artifacts are your guides. A chipped flint core tells you of planning. A polished bracelet tells you of beauty. A burial tells you of love. These things bridge the gap between then and now. When you place a necklace around your neck, when you paint your face, when you mourn your dead, you are repeating gestures the shadows once made. Their culture lives in echoes, and you are the echo chamber. So as you sit tonight, perhaps with a small flame nearby, think of the first flames, the first colors smeared, the first beads strung. Think of the hands that shaped tools with care, that buried bodies with tenderness, that painted walls with vision. The stage is set for a meeting. Your kind, Homo sapiens, is leaving Africa in waves around 60,000 years ago, marching across deserts and coasts, hungry for new lands. But the continents are not empty. Picture the first encounters with Neanderthals in the Middle East. The Levant is a crossroads of warm valleys and limestone caves, rich in gazelle and plant life. Here sapiens bands trickling north meet Neanderthal groups, pushing south. Imagine the scene. Two hunting parties catch sight of each other at a watering hole. Both freeze. The sapiens are slimmer, with finer tools. The Neanderthals are broad-shouldered, gripping heavy spears. Neither side knows the other's language, but both understand caution. A standoff begins. Do they flee? Do they fight? Or do they simply circle the water, taking turns under tense silence? Europe tells a similar tale, but at larger scale. Around 45,000 years ago, sapiens sweep into the continent. Neanderthals had been its rulers for hundreds of thousands of years, hunting mammoths, shaping Mousterian tools, weathering Ice Age winters. Suddenly, new arrivals bring blades, ornaments, art, and different strategies. Contact is intense. In some regions, Neanderthals vanish quickly after sapiens arrive, suggesting competition and perhaps violence. Yet genetic traces in modern Europeans show Neanderthal blood mingled with sapiens. Conflict and union overlapped, messy and human. Europe became the stage where Neanderthals slowly dimmed, but not before leaving themselves permanently in you. Farther east, encounters with Denisovans unfolded. These are harder to picture because fossils are so rare, but DNA tells you they were there, waiting in Siberia, Tibet, and Southeast Asia. When sapiens moved into these lands, interbreeding occurred multiple times. Imagine one band of sapiens meeting a Denisovan hunting group in the Altai Mountains. Wary glances, cautious exchanges, eventually perhaps alliances for survival against predators or cold. Thousands of miles away, another sapiens band encounters a different Denisovan subgroup, genetically distinct. Again, the mingling happens. Each meeting leaves new fragments of DNA scattered into the sapiens genome. You are the sum of not one, but many such meetings. On islands, the meetings may have been more shocking. Imagine arriving in Flores, weary from sea crossings, only to glimpse small, 3-foot-tall figures moving through the undergrowth. Homo floresiensis, the hobbits, stare back at you, wide-eyed, carrying stone flakes. What did sapiens think? Did they laugh? Did they fear? Did they see them as spirits, animals, or kin? Whatever the reaction, floresiensis soon vanish from the record, disappearing within the time frame of sapiens' arrival. Perhaps competition doomed them, perhaps disease carried by newcomers swept them away, perhaps interbreeding never happened at all. Their absence from your DNA suggests contact, if it occurred, was short-lived, but the Philippines tell a slightly different story. Homo luzonensis lived on Luzon until at least 50,000 years ago, overlapping with sapiens' expansions. Once again, the fossil record goes quiet just as sapiens appear. Imagine stepping ashore, hearing rustles in the forest, and glimpsing small human-like figures slipping into trees. Did contact happen face to face? Or did sapiens only find traces, tools, footprints, bones? Luzonensis vanish like hobbits, swallowed by time, their fate tied to your arrival. In these encounters, sapiens may not have blended, but they certainly displaced. Not every meeting ended with hybrid children. Some ended with silence. The question hangs heavy. Were sapiens invaders or collaborators? The evidence suggests both. In some valleys, they fought. In others, they mingled. In yet others, they displaced without much trace. Humanity's story is not one of noble diplomacy alone, nor of pure violence. It is a spectrum, messy and complicated, like modern encounters between cultures. You did not walk into the world alone. You walked into a chorus and sometimes sang along, sometimes drowned out voices, sometimes absorbed them. Think, too, of the exchanges beyond genes. Ideas might have passed between lineages. Some researchers suggest that ornaments, pigments, and tools attributed to Neanderthals may have been inspired by sapiens' neighbors, or perhaps sapiens borrowed techniques from Neanderthals, adapting them into their own cultures. Picture a meeting by a fire where one group shows how to haft a spear with resin, while the other demonstrates a new blade design. Knowledge travels even when words are lacking. Your species thrives not only on innovation, but also on borrowing. Perhaps that habit began long before recorded history, with exchanges across species lines. And what of language? Did these meetings include attempts to communicate? Imagine the awkwardness of two groups gesturing wildly, pointing to animals, mimicking actions, slowly developing a shared repertoire of signs. Maybe there were moments of frustration, laughter, breakthroughs. The first multilingual encounters may not have been between French and German, but between sapiens and Neanderthals, fumbling toward understanding with grunts and gestures. Out of such encounters, alliances could form. You can almost hear it. A Neanderthal word for bison traded for a sapiens gesture for fire. Primitive, yes, but effective. The emotional dimension matters too. When children of mixed ancestry were born, did they belong? Were they outcasts, bridges, or both? Fossils don't tell you, but human nature suggests bonds form. A hybrid child, nurtured by a group, may have been proof of peace between lineages, a living link, or perhaps such children face suspicion, embodying the tension of difference. You'll never know, but imagining them helps humanize the process. Behind the sterile word interbreeding were lives, loves. What's clear is that these encounters changed everything. Without them, sapiens might have remained confined to small territories, weaker against disease, slower to adapt. Neanderthal and Denisovan genes boosted immunity, endurance, and resilience. Even encounters with lineages that vanished entirely reshaped landscapes of survival by removing competition or inspiring innovation. The expansion of sapiens across the globe was not a solo conquest. It was a collaborative, contested, intertwined process. The world you inherited was forged in those encounters. It is tempting to frame sapiens as inevitable victors, destined to outlast the shadows, but that's hindsight talking. At the time, sapiens were newcomers, fragile, few in number compared to well-established Neanderthals. Victory was never guaranteed. Without alliances, without hybrid children, without borrowed genes, you might not have survived outside Africa at all. The shadows didn't just fall, they held you up as you stumbled forward. So when you picture the first meetings, resist the urge to see only conflict or only romance. Picture both. Picture the tense standoffs, the sudden violence, but also the cautious curiosity, the shared firelight, the laughter at clumsy gestures, the whispered songs in strange accents. Picture children born of those nights, their faces a mix of features, their lives a bridge between worlds. Those encounters weren't the margins of history, they were history itself, the crucible where your species became global. And as you sit here now, safe in your warm room, remember that every breath you take is the outcome of those meetings. You are not just sapiens, you are part Neanderthal, part Denisovan, part unknown ghost. You are the child of encounters conflicted, complicated, and enduring. The shadows may be gone, but they live on in you. Proof that humanity was never a single line, but a braid of many threads, woven together in the firelight of long-forgotten nights. By now you've walked through the caves of Siberia, across the snowy steppes of Europe, up the thin air ridges of Tibet, and into the jungled islands of Southeast Asia. You've met Neanderthals, Denisovans, and tiny island dwellers, watched them mingle with sapiens and felt their presence lingering in your DNA. But the truth is sobering, almost all of them are gone. Between about 100,000 and 50,000 years ago, one by one, these other human lineages began to vanish. They didn't all disappear overnight in a single apocalypse. Their endings were gradual, uneven, stretched across tens of thousands of years. Some dwindled until only a few bands remained. Some were absorbed into sapiens, others simply faded, leaving empty caves and scattered bones. Tonight you trace their vanishing, asking not only how they died out, but also why they couldn't hold on when sapiens thrived. Start with Neanderthals. They dominated Europe for more than 300,000 years longer than sapiens have yet existed. But by about 40,000 years ago, they were gone. Archaeological layers show their final traces in Iberia and Gibraltar, where small groups clung on while sapiens spread northward. What happened? Theories abound. Climate change may have fragmented their habitats, shrinking forests and herds. Diseases carried by sapiens may have struck populations without immunity. Competition for resources surely played a role, as sapiens hunted more efficiently, traveled farther, and perhaps cooperated in larger groups. Even interbreeding, while it preserved their genes, may have diluted their distinct populations until Neanderthals were no longer separate. Their disappearance wasn't a single catastrophe, it was death by 1,000 cuts, until the last embers winked out. Denisovans, too, vanish in this window. Unlike Neanderthals, you don't have a rich fossil record to trace their final days, but genetic evidence suggests they were widespread, and then, suddenly, absent. By 50,000 years ago, their populations were dwindling, They survived longest in Asia, their legacy preserved in the genes of Melanesians and Tibetans. But their bodies are gone. Perhaps they were always more scattered than Neanderthals, stretched thin across vast distances, their communities too isolated to endure pressure from incoming sapiens. Perhaps their mastery of mountains and forests wasn't enough when confronted with waves of newcomers armed with new tools and new social strategies. Like Neanderthals, they blended into you, but their distinct identity dissolved. The island dwellers faced an even harsher fate. Homo floresiensis disappears from Flores around 50,000 years ago, just as modern humans appear in the region. Coincidence? Likely not. With small populations confined to a single island, they were vulnerable to any disruption, competition for food, diseases introduced by sapiens, or even direct violence could have wiped them out quickly. Their bones go silent after that, leaving only myths of Ibu Gogo in island folklore. Homo luzonensis follows a similar path in the Philippines. Their fossils date to about 50,000 years ago, and then no more. Like candles snuffed out, these small but mighty lineages vanish almost as soon as sapiens arrive. One explanation often offered is sheer demographic weight. Sapiens reproduced faster, moved in larger groups, and forged wider networks. Imagine two bands meeting at a river. One is Neanderthal, 20 individuals, tough but small in number. The other is sapiens, 50 strong, with allies just a valley away. Over time, the bigger group wins, not always through violence, but through resilience. If disease strikes, the larger group recovers. If game is scarce, the larger group spreads farther. Little by little, the smaller bands are absorbed or erased. Evolution isn't always dramatic, it's often just math. Technology mattered too. Sapiens developed blade tools, projectile weapons, and composite implements that extended their reach. A bow and arrow can kill from afar, where a thrusting spear requires dangerous closeness. A carefully planned hunt with nets or traps yields more food than brute pursuit. The archaeological record shows a diversification of sapiens tools around 50,000 years ago, just as shadows vanish. Perhaps this technological edge tipped the scales. When survival balances on a knife edge, sharper tools can mean survival for one group and extinction for another. Culture and communication gave sapiens another advantage. If language was more complex, if stories and strategies could be shared across wider networks, sapiens could coordinate on scales Neanderthals couldn't. Imagine one group of sapiens inventing a new hunting strategy in a valley, then passing it on to allies hundreds of miles away. Innovations spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, Neanderthal groups remained more isolated, innovations trapped in small circles. Over time, sapiens' ability to share knowledge created exponential growth. Extinction may have been as much about silence as about spears, and yet extinction was not total in every sense. Genes live on. When you look in the mirror, you see Neanderthal brows in some faces, Denisovan adaptations in others. Their bodies disappeared, but their biology persists. You could argue they didn't vanish so much as transform, absorbed into a new mosaic lineage. Yours. In that sense, they aren't gone at all. They are your ghosts, hidden in your blood. But the fact remains. As distinct populations, they ceased to exist. Their languages, their songs, their rituals, their unique ways of seeing the world, all are lost. It is this loss that feels most haunting. Imagine the last Neanderthal band in Iberia, huddled in a cave. Outside, the world warms. Sapiens move closer, game shifts north. Inside, only a handful remain. Perhaps they knew they were the last, watching their children die without finding mates, their traditions ending with them. The silence after them is deafening. You want to step back in time, to sit with them by the fire, to tell them their blood will live on in you. But history does not console. It only moves forward. Consider also the possibility of chance. Some extinctions might not have been inevitable. Small populations are fragile. A single epidemic, a volcanic eruption, a series of bad winters, any of these could have toppled them. The hobbits of Flores may have fallen to a tsunami or eruption, rather than direct sapiens pressure. Denisovans may have been scattered thin enough that one climatic shift broke them. Sometimes extinction isn't a grand battle between species, but a roll of the dice. The shadows remind you that survival often comes down to luck as much as strength. Still, sapiens' role can't be ignored. Wherever your kind arrived, other humans disappeared soon after. Africa had already lost earlier hominins before sapiens spread out. Europe lost Neanderthals. Asia lost Denisovans. Islands lost hobbits. The pattern is stark. Like a wildfire, sapiens expanded, and other lineages flickered out. Whether through competition, assimilation, or violence, your rise coincided with their fall. You walk on a world cleared of rivals, and that clearing came at a cost. The irony is that you didn't even realize it. For tens of thousands of years afterward, sapiens likely had no memory of their cousins. Myths may have carried fragments, the giants, the little people, the mountain spirits, but the reality of shared humanity was forgotten. Only now, with DNA sequencing and archaeology, do you rediscover the truth. You were never alone, and your dominance came not from isolation but from conquest and blending. The vanishing of the Shadow Children leaves you with questions that cut deep. Was it inevitable? Was sapiens destined to rule, or did contingency decide? If the Ice Age had lasted longer, if Neanderthals had been more numerous, if hobbits had more islands, could they have survived alongside you? And yet, perhaps that was never the path. Evolution favors those who adapt best to changing environments, and sapiens proved uniquely adaptable. The shadows gave much, but in the end they could not keep pace with the speed, scale, and spread of your kind. Their vanishing is tragic, but it is also what made room for your story. The firelight that once flickered in Neanderthal caves now flickers in your homes. Their breath lingers in your lungs, their strength in your blood, their loss in your conscience. So when you think of extinction, don't think only of failure. Think of transition, of inheritance. The shadows did not vanish without leaving gifts. They gave you genes, tools, lessons, and even myths. Their disappearance is woven into your survival. They are gone, but they are also here, in you. And the only tragedy greater than their vanishing would be forgetting them. The shadows may have disappeared as distinct peoples, but they didn't leave you empty-handed. Their DNA lingers like faint signatures scribbled in the margins of your genome, subtle yet profound. Tonight you trace those echoes in modern blood, discovering how Neanderthal and Denisovan fragments continue to shape the bodies, immune systems, and even the minds of sapiens today. They are not fossils in a museum. They are alive in you, hidden upgrades and lingering quirks from cousins long gone. Start with immunity. When modern humans left Africa, they encountered new pathogens, viruses and bacteria foreign to their immune systems. Without preparation, such infections could have been devastating. Neanderthals and Denisovans, however, had lived in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. Their immune systems were battle-tested against local diseases. Through interbreeding, sapiens acquired immune-related genes like those in the HLA human leukocyte antigen complex. These boosted responses against pathogens, helping newcomers survive. Imagine a sapiens child inheriting a Neanderthal HLA variant. When a strange fever sweeps the valley, that child survives while others perish. The gene carries forward, a silent gift from a shadow ancestor, but immunity comes at a cost. Some Neanderthal variants are linked to autoimmune disorders like lupus, Crohn's disease, and even severe allergies. In the past, hypervigilant immune systems were life-saving. In modern times, surrounded by pollen and processed food, they can misfire. Every sneeze in spring, every flare of inflammation may be your Neanderthal heritage overreacting. It's the double-edged sword of survival. What once saved you now nags you. Skin and hair also bear echoes. Genes from Neanderthals influenced keratin production, shaping hair texture and skin resilience. Some populations inherited genes that altered skin pigmentation, allowing better vitamin D synthesis in northern climates with weaker sunlight. Freckles, fair skin, even certain hair colors may carry Neanderthal roots. Picture a Paleolithic winter, weak sunlight, endless snow. The child with lighter skin, thanks to a Neanderthal gene, absorbs more vitamin D and avoids ricket. Today, the same trait produces freckles you might curse in summer, but owe to Ice Age survival. Metabolism, too, shows their hand. Denisovan and Neanderthal DNA contributed to fat storage and glucose regulation. In harsh climates, storing fat was vital. Today, the same genes may predispose people to diabetes or obesity when food is abundant. Altitude adaptation is one of the most striking echoes. As you learned earlier, Tibetans carry a Denisovan-derived gene, EPAS1, that prevents overproduction of red blood cells at high elevation. Without it, thin air causes blood to thicken, straining the heart. With it, Tibetans thrive on the roof of the world. That single fragment of Denisovan DNA shaped entire civilizations, enabling monasteries, trade routes, and cultures across the Himalayas. It is an echo not just in blood but in history itself. Disease resistance also bears their mark. Some Denisovan genes help combat viral infections like hepatitis or influenza. Others influence how your immune system detects and neutralizes invaders. Think of them as ancient antivirus software installed in your genome, constantly updated through encounters with pathogens. Without these borrowed defenses, sapiens' expansions into new lands might have failed. Denisovans may be gone, but their genetic shield still guards you. Behavior in the brain may also carry traces. Some Neanderthal DNA influences circadian rhythms, the body's internal clock. Certain variants predispose people to being night owls or early risers, possibly reflecting adaptations to Europe's long winter nights. Others affect neurological pathways linked to mood and even depression. Imagine a Neanderthal winter, months of darkness pressing heavy. A gene that regulates sleep and mood makes the gloom more bearable. Today, it might manifest as seasonal affective disorder, or as resilience against it. Even your mental quirks may carry shadow fingerprints. There are stranger echoes still. Some Neanderthal variants are linked to nicotine addiction in modern humans. It's ironic. You inherited a vulnerability to cigarettes from a cousin who never saw tobacco, but the gene may once have heightened sensitivity to plant alkaloids useful for medicine or defense. Evolution doesn't care that modern cigarettes exist. It only cares that once, long ago, that trait helped survival. COVID-19 even revealed shadow legacies. A cluster of Neanderthal genes on chromosome 3 was associated with increased risk of severe infection, while another cluster on chromosome 12 offered protection. In other words, a 50,000-year-old inheritance influenced outcomes in a 21st century pandemic. That's not prehistory, it's current events, shaped by ghosts. You survived or struggled, in part because of who your ancestors mingled with on Ice Age nights. Not all shadows left equal traces. Africans, whose ancestors mostly remained on the continent, carry far less Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA. Yet even there, back migration from Eurasia reintroduced some fragments. No population is untouched. Humanity today is one interwoven fabric of shadows and light. Purity is a myth, hybridity is the truth. The shadows live in everyone, though in different degrees, and the echoes don't stop at biology. They may shape how you experience the world. Resilience in cold, tolerance of altitude, immune responses to food, all shape daily life. The haunting truth is that you may never know the full extent of their legacy. Ancient DNA studies keep revealing new surprises. Each year brings announcements of previously unknown interbreeding events, of ghost populations hinted at only by stray genetic fragments. Some of your quirks, your strengths, your vulnerabilities may be gifts from species you don't even know existed. You carry not only echoes you can name, but echoes you haven't yet discovered. This realization reframes extinction. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others may have vanished physically, but they endure biologically. They didn't leave the stage entirely. They linger behind the curtain, feeding lines to your performance. You are not the sole protagonist of humanity's story. You are the chorus of many, their voices mingling in your blood. So tonight, as you settle into your bed and breathe deep, remember, each breath carries molecules shaped by Denisovan lungs. Each heartbeat pulses with Neanderthal resilience. Each immune cell carries echoes of their battles. You are not alone in your body. You are a symphony of shadows, living proof that extinction is never absolute when memory survives in flesh. The past is not gone. It walks with you, quietly, invisibly, every single day. Start with Europe. Medieval and earlier traditions are filled with giants, huge, strong beings who lived in caves and mountains, who fought humans, sometimes ate them, sometimes taught them. The Nephilim of biblical lore, the Jötnar of Norse myth, the giants of Celtic tales, all paint a world where enormous, powerful others once roamed. Now recall Neanderthals, stocky, broad-shouldered, their bones far denser than yours, their strength formidable. Imagine a Sapiens band, remembering encounters with them as giants. Over generations, stories exaggerate until Neanderthals become towering monsters. But the kernel of truth, the presence of another, stronger kind of human remains. Folklore as memory. In Central Asia, legends tell of mountain spirits, hairy, powerful, elusive. The Amas of Mongolia, for instance, are described as human-like yet distinct, living in caves, feared and respected. These descriptions sound eerily like Denisovans. After all, Denisova Cave sits in Siberia, not far from the ranges where Amas stories persist. Could the memory of encounters with broad-faced, mountain-dwelling cousins have survived as oral tradition? You can almost picture a sapiens child, shivering near a fire, listening to elders warn of the Amas in the ridges above. Not myth, perhaps, but memory of neighbors now vanished. Move to the islands of Southeast Asia. On Flores, stories still circulate of the Ebelgogo, small, hairy people who lived in caves, stole food and mimicked human speech. Villagers claim their grandparents knew of them, some saying they were driven away only in the 18th century. When Homo floresiensis was discovered in Leangbua Cave, the resemblance was shocking. Tiny humans with long arms, capable of tool use, living until 50,000 years ago, or if folklore is right, maybe much later. Perhaps the Ebelgogo weren't purely imaginary. Perhaps memory of hobbits lived on for millennia, blurred into legend. The Philippines has its own echoes. Indigenous tales speak of small forest people, sometimes mischievous, sometimes helpful, blending into trees with agility. Homo luzonensis, with its curved toe bones adapted for climbing, fits this description uncannily. Imagine early sapiens sharing Luzon with them, seeing small figures slip into canopies and telling stories that survived long after Luzonensis themselves were gone. By the time colonists wrote down local myths, the bones were already buried, but the cultural memory lingered. Africa, too, holds whispers. Some hunter-gatherer groups tell of other peoples, small, shy, living in forests or mountains, encountered long ago. Since Africa was the cradle of human diversity, it likely hosted many lineages now unknown. Fossils like Homo naledi suggest small-bodied humans coexisted with early sapiens in South Africa as recently as 250,000 years ago. Perhaps myths of little people are echoes of real encounters, passed across centuries of fireside storytelling. Even in the Americas, where sapiens arrived only about 15,000 years ago, folklore of giants and hairy wild people abounds. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, modern cryptids echo ancient themes. Most scientists dismiss them as imagination or misinterpretation, yet the persistence of such stories worldwide suggests something deeper. Maybe humans carry an instinctive memory of sharing the earth with other human-like beings. It is a story so old it repeats itself in every culture, like a dream you can't quite shake. It's easy to scoff, but remember, before 2003, no one believed in hobbits. Before 2010, Denisovans weren't even a word. Science catches up to what folklore sometimes hints. What if future caves yield more bones, confirming that some legends aren't entirely invention? Myth may be the archive where memory outlasts bone. These legends also reveal how sapiens perceived others, sometimes as enemies, giants to be slain, sometimes as tricksters, small people stealing food, sometimes as teachers or semi-divine beings, holders of wisdom, fire, or crafts. That spectrum mirrors real encounters, competition, curiosity, exchange. Folklore preserved emotional truths, if not precise details. Giants were dangerous, small people were uncanny, mountain spirits were both feared and respected. Strip away exaggeration, and you glimpse sapiens grappling with otherness. Picture the scene. A sapiens elder in Ice Age Europe sits by a fire, children gathered close. He speaks of giants in the caves to the north. The children shiver, eyes wide, knowing the warning is practical: don't wander alone. Others live nearby, or in Flores. A mother scolds her child, don't leave food outside. The Abu Gogo will take it. The story shapes behavior, passes memory, and keeps the presence of others alive long after the last real encounter. The fascinating part is that such tales often describe beings as not quite human, yet not quite animal, hairy but upright, strange but familiar. That's exactly what Neanderthals, Denisovans, and hobbits would have seemed like to sapiens. Uncanny mirrors. Folklore captures that unease, the recognition of kinship blurred with difference. It is the uncanny valley of prehistory turned into story. Even modern encounters hint at persistence. Reports of wild men in Siberia or Central Asia or small people in Indonesian forests may be nothing more than hoaxes or misidentifications, but they show the enduring human expectation of others. Your imagination fills forests with shadows because, for most of history, forests really did hold other humans. The loneliness of sapiens-only Earth is new. Folklore is the echo chamber of a world once crowded. Some legends even record cooperation. Myths of culture heroes learning fire or tools from strangers may recall exchanges with Neanderthals or Denisovans. Perhaps sapiens really did borrow techniques. Over time, the memory of trade becomes myth of divine gift. The truth is twisted but not erased. Myth is not history, but it is not random either. It is memory distorted by distance. And here you are, thousands of years later, passing those stories. You realize that in myths of giants and little people, you hear faint voices of cousins long gone. They are not just fantasy, They are echoes of encounters, warnings, memories, and emotions. Science and folklore, when layered together, paint a richer picture than either alone. The shadows are not silent. They whisper through genes and through stories alike. So tonight, when you hear a folk tale of strange beings in mountains or forests, pause before dismissing it. Perhaps it carries an ember of truth. Perhaps long ago, someone really did see a figure step from the trees, broad-shouldered or small, not sapiens, but human all the same. That fleeting encounter burned into memory, retold for generations, reshaped into myth. In those stories, the shadows live on, not in bones, not in DNA, but in words and imagination. And maybe that is the greatest survival of all. Genes fade, bones crumble, but stories endure. The giants, the little people, the mountain spirits, they remain in your culture, reminding you that you were never alone. Humanity has always been plural, always shared. The shadows may have vanished from the earth, but they walk with you in story, shaping the way you see forests, mountains, and the unknown. In myths, as in blood, they are still here. You've listened to the whispers of folklore, where the shadows linger in stories of giants and little people, but the reason you know about Denisovans, Neanderthals, and hobbits at all is because of something far more recent: science. Only in the last few decades have new technologies cracked open the past in ways no shovel alone ever could. Ancient DNA sequencing, proteomics, high-resolution dating, and even computer modeling now illuminate the dark corridors of prehistory. Tonight you'll trace how modern tools of science are unraveling mysteries that myths only hinted at, and how each discovery shows that the story of humanity is still unfinished. It begins in the 1980s, when geneticists first tried extracting DNA from ancient bones. Early attempts were frustrating, plagued by contamination. A scientist would think they'd found Neanderthal DNA, only to realize it was their own skin cells sneaking into the sample. The real revolution came with high-throughput sequencing in the 2000s. Instead of painstakingly reading short fragments one by one, machines could now churn through billions of DNA letters quickly. This allowed scientists to piece together entire Neanderthal genomes from mere bone dust. Suddenly, questions that had lingered for centuries — were Neanderthals human? Did they interbreed with us? — could be answered with precision. Spoiler: yes, they were human, and yes, they absolutely mingled with us. DNA became the courtroom where speculation was tried and verdicts delivered. Denisovans were revealed this way too. Remember that finger bone in Siberia? Without DNA sequencing, it would have been just another unidentified fossil fragment. But in 2010, scientists ran its genetic code and discovered it belonged to a completely unknown lineage. A new species announced itself not through skeletons, but through strings of S, T's, C's, and G's on a computer screen. That's astonishing. A species you never even saw in life told its story from a single bone chip. Technology didn't just answer questions, it asked new ones you never imagined. Proteomics, the study of ancient proteins, pushes further still. DNA decays quickly, often gone after 100,000 years, but proteins survive longer. They're like molecular fossils, carrying signatures of species identity. In Tibet, the Denisovan jawbone was confirmed not by DNA, but by analyzing its collagen proteins. Without that, you might still call it an odd Neanderthal. Proteomics extends your reach deeper in time, into eras DNA cannot reach. It's like tuning your ears to fainter echoes, catching whispers from even further back. Then there's radiocarbon dating, refined with new calibration curves. Charcoal fragments, shells, and bones can now be dated with remarkable accuracy, anchoring timelines of who lived where and when. You can see that Neanderthals disappeared from most of Europe by 40,000 years ago, or that hobbits thrived until at least 50,000. Each date is a pin on the map of time, giving structure to the blur of prehistory. Without dating, fossils float unmoored. With it you see patterns, rises and falls. Even dirt speaks now. Sediment DNA analysis allows scientists to detect genetic traces in soil from caves without finding bones at all. In Denisova Cave, DNA fragments of Denisovans, Neanderthals, and animals were pulled from dirt layers, revealing who lived there and when. Picture it, sweeping a bit of cave dust into a vial, and out comes a story of coexistence. It's ghost hunting at the molecular level, proof that the shadows left fingerprints even where their bodies are gone. Computers knit it all together. Powerful algorithms reconstruct ancient genomes, simulate migrations, and model population sizes. They reveal bottlenecks where lineages nearly died, expansions where they thrived, and interbreeding events you could never see with fossils alone. For example, genome modeling shows that modern Melanesians carry Denisovan DNA from at least 2 distinct mingling events. Without computing power, those complexities would remain invisible. Technology doesn't just uncover, it interprets, turning fragments into narratives. The surprises keep coming. In 2021, researchers reconstructed ghost lineages purely from genetic signals. Modern DNA carries patterns that don't match known species, suggesting interbreeding with lineages you've never identified. That means there are still humans out there, lost entirely to fossils, who nonetheless live in your blood. You might never find their bones, but their DNA whispers that they once walked among you. Imagine realizing your family has relatives you never met, but who nonetheless shaped your face. That's the power of modern genetics. Even art tells new stories with technology. Cave paintings, long thought to be sapiens' work, have been redated and in some cases attributed to Neanderthals. High-precision dating of Spanish cave art, red discs, hand stencils, abstract lines, places them before sapiens arrived. That means Neanderthals painted too. Technology forces you to rewrite assumptions. You are not the only artists, not the only symbol makers. The shadows painted their own worlds in ochre and ash. The flood of data can feel dizzying, but it is profoundly humbling. Each technological leap reminds you how much you still don't know. 10 years ago, Denisovans were unknown. 20 years ago, hobbits were fantasy. 30 years ago, Neanderthal DNA was beyond reach. What will the next decade reveal? Another lineage hiding in a drawer? A ghost population sequenced from dust? Maybe even traces of humans millions of years back, captured in proteins long forgotten. The shadows keep expanding, reminding you the story is not finished. There's a lesson in all this. For centuries, sapiens assumed superiority, casting other humans as brutish, failed, or irrelevant. Technology has humbled you. Neanderthals were skilled, Denisovans were adaptable, hobbits were ingenious. You did not conquer an empty world. You survived in a crowded one, borrowing as much as inventing. The shadows are not footnotes. They are co-authors of your story. Without science, you might still dismiss them. With it, you see their brilliance. And perhaps the greatest gift of technology is perspective. You no longer imagine yourself as the inevitable pinnacle, but as one branch among many. Others branch too, and though they withered, their roots nourish you still. Every sequencer, every microscope, every computer that reconstructs the past, peels back arrogance, reminding you that you are stitched together by shadows. The family tree is tangled, yes, but it is also richer than you dared hope. So tonight, as you think of glowing screens and humming machines, remember what they truly do. They let the dead speak. Denisovans tell their story through a fingerbone's DNA. Neanderthals whisper through pigments in caves. Hobbits return through CT scans of fragile skulls. Science does not erase mystery. It makes mystery legible. And every discovery brings you closer to seeing the shadows not as strangers, but as family. You've journeyed far through the labyrinth of human prehistory, walked beside Homo erectus as they trudged across continents, watched Neanderthals survive Ice Age nights, glimpsed Denisovans breathing steady in Himalayan winds, and crouched in the jungle shadows with the hobbits of Flores and Luzon. You've seen their tools, touched their pigments, and even felt their lingering DNA inside you. But now the story bends toward its end, or rather toward its present, which is still unfolding. The shadows may have vanished in body, yet they are not finished. Tonight you rest with the thought that the human story remains open, its pages still turning, its hidden lineages still waiting to be found. First, remember how recently these discoveries have arrived. Denisovans didn't exist in science books until 2010, when a finger bone in a Siberian cave rewrote everything. Homo floresiensis was dismissed as fantasy until 2003, when a tiny skeleton in Langdua silenced doubters. Homo luzonensis wasn't even named until 2019, its curved toe bones whispering of a lineage you'd never imagined. Each decade brings a revelation that makes your tidy family tree messier, more tangled, and far more interesting. If you think you know the full cast of human history now, you are almost certainly wrong. Somewhere under soil or ice, more bones wait, more genes hide in modern blood, more surprises are ready to step into the light. Consider Africa, still underexplored compared to Europe or Asia. Fossils like Homo naledi in South Africa, with its mix of ancient and modern traits, prove that the continent sheltered multiple lineages deep into the last 300,000 years. How many others remain unseen in unexplored caves or eroded valleys? It's humbling to realize that the very ground you walk on may hold relatives you've yet to meet. The unfinished story is not confined to distant lands. It lies beneath your feet. And then there are the ghost lineages revealed in your DNA. Modern genetic studies keep finding fragments that don't match any known species, stray sequences that hint at forgotten populations. These genetic phantoms may represent humans who never left fossils or whose remains lie undiscovered. Their bodies are gone, but their genes live inside you. Imagine a lineage entirely absent from the fossil record, known only because a sliver of their DNA helped one of your ancestors survive a fever 50,000 years ago. They are invisible but real, shaping you in ways you can't see. That realization changes how you view extinction. Perhaps no lineage ever disappears completely. Even if their bodies fade, their genes persist, their stories woven into you. Neanderthals, Denisovans, hobbits gone, yet here. Future discoveries will almost certainly show that other shadows also left marks. Humanity isn't a straight line with others chopped off. It is a braided river, with tributaries merging, splitting, rejoining. You are not the final branch. You are the confluence. But the unfinished story is not only about the past, it is also about what you choose to do with this knowledge now. The shadows remind you that identity is never singular. You are not pure sapiens, because there is no such thing. You are a mosaic of lineages, a walking archive of survival strategies. In an age when people argue over difference and purity, the shadows laugh. They know that humanity has always been plural, always a patchwork. To deny that is to deny your own blood. Technology keeps widening the horizon. Ancient DNA labs grow ever more precise, sequencing smaller and older samples. Proteomics reaches further back, pulling signals from fossils where DNA is gone. Sediment analysis extracts genetic whispers from cave dust, making it possible to study places where no bones survive. Each innovation ensures that new chapters will be written, that forgotten kin will step forward once again. Imagine a headline 10 years from now, New human species discovered in African cave DNA links them to modern immunity. That is not science fiction, it is inevitable. And yet, perhaps the most profound unfinished business is emotional. The shadows raise a question. What does it mean to be human? For centuries you told yourself that art, language, and technology set sapiens apart. But Neanderthals painted caves, Denisovans carved jewelry, hobbits hunted elephants. Each discovery erases another line of separation. Humanity is not just you, it is all of them. To accept that is to embrace humility, to see yourself not as a lone pinnacle but as one chorus among many voices. There is also grief here. When you think of the last Neanderthal child in Iberia, or the last hobbit vanishing into Flores' forests, you feel the loss. Entire languages, songs and ways of seeing the world are gone forever. You carry their genes but not their stories. That absence is the heaviest weight, not knowing what they dreamed, how they prayed, what myths they told under starry skies. You mourn what is irretrievable, even as you celebrate what lingers. The shadows are gone, but they leave an ache behind. And still, there is hope. By remembering them, by telling their stories, you keep them alive in the only way you can. Every time you say Denisovan, Neanderthal, Floresiensis, you summon them from silence. Every fossil studied, every genome sequenced, every myth reconsidered is another act of resurrection. They may never walk again, but they walk through you. Memory is a kind of survival, and you are their memory. Think of yourself tonight as a link in their chain. You inhale Denisovan breath at altitude. Your immune system bristles with Neanderthal defenses. Your hands echo